Until then, we'll bring you continued coverage of a first-degree attempted murder trial heard just last week in Knoxville, Tennessee. Prosecutors there said a love triangle between a local newspaper reporter and a young mother and her husband turned into an attempted homicide. Court TV's Greg Jarrett has this background report on the case of Tennessee versus Michael Frazier.
She had her nightgown on and she had blood all over her hands and all.
She is Lisa Whedbee, who in May of 1993 was featured in this Mother's Day article in a Knoxville newspaper with her husband Rob. The award-winning article was written by this reporter, Michael Frazier. It profiled the Whedbees' struggle to raise their daughter who suffers from Down syndrome. But Frazier's relationship with Lisa Whedbee went beyond a newspaper story. Frazier and Whedbee were fellow parishioners at this church in Knoxville, and shortly after Frazier's story was published, the couple began an affair. Frazier and Whedbee would meet here in Frazier's apartment, where neighbors say they never noticed anything unusual.
They were pretty normal, and they just seemed like a normal couple. I mean, he didn't look like a homicidal maniac, neither did she.
But what happened on June 8, 1994 was far from normal. Frazier claims Lisa Whedbee told him her husband had been physically abusing her for years, and she wanted Frazier's help in killing him.
In our words, it's about attempted first-degree murder, as charged.
Prosecutors say Frazier hid in a basement closet of the Whedbee home for hours before attacking Rob Whedbee in his bedroom. Whedbee awoke moments before he was attacked and struggled briefly with Frazier. Whedbee suffered only superficial wounds before escaping to a neighbor's home. Frazier was arrested the next morning and now faces charges of attempted first-degree murder. Lisa Whedbee stood in the bedroom doorway with a baseball bat, but did not attack her husband. She is charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. She is now awaiting trial. Frazier admits he did enter the Whedbee bedroom with an intent to kill, but at the last moment he froze, only to fend off Whedbee's attacks when he awakened.
He did not attempt to murder Rob Whedbee, and that's basically it.
Frazier's attorneys will rely on the affirmative defense of renunciation. That means that although Frazier admits he conspired to kill Rob Whedbee, he changed his mind at the last moment and stopped the attack before Whedbee fled.
Under the renunciation defense, after someone has committed an attempt, a solicitation, or a conspiracy, the law permits them to essentially change their mind, and that change of mind is a defense. The purpose of it is to encourage people to not go through with a completed crime, that is, to do the attempt and quit.
The question that now faces a Tennessee jury is this: did Michael Frazier attempt to kill Rob Whedbee, or did he, as he contends, change his mind just moments before it was too late? Greg Jarrett, Court TV.
We'll be right back with highlights from this unusual first-degree attempted murder case, Tennessee versus Frazier, when we return from this short commercial break. I'm Raymond Brown. Court TV is bringing you the case of Tennessee versus Frazier, an unusual attempted murder trial involving an award-winning reporter who's accused of attempting to murder the husband of his lover. Yesterday we brought you opening statements from a prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Joe Helms, who told this jury that this was a case about lust and greed, in which Frazier, the defendant's desire for this woman and for an insurance policy held by her husband, inspired her to attempt to murder her husband. The defense opened saying that this was a man who had been lonely all of his life and had been misled by things told to him by his lover, in which he had indicated that this woman had been abused by her husband for many years. Today we're going to hear the testimony of a witness named William Shin, who was a next-door neighbor who awoke to hear some turmoil next door.
Same address.
Who's your next-door neighbor?
Rob Whedbee.
And how are your houses situated?
His driveway and my driveway are beside of each other. His garage, end of his house, and my bedroom are closest to each other.
Right. And I believe your house is situated a tad bit higher on the slope out there, is
yes.
that right? Okay. Do you sleep with your windows open on occasion? Your bedroom windows?
Yes.
And on the evening of June 7th, June 8th, 1994, was that in fact the case?
It was.
Did What time do y'all go to bed? You are married, aren't you?
Yes,
And what's your wife's name?
Suzanne.
What do you two do for a living?
I teach middle school art.
Okay, and what's your wife?
She's an elementary music teacher.
On that evening, had you gone to bed prior to 1 o'clock on the morning?
About 11:30, I believe.
11:30?
Yes.
Okay, and did something occur early on the morning of June the 8th?
Yes, about 1:30.
What happened?
I was awakened by Rob. I heard Bill Shin real loud.
Your Honor, at this point, we would object based on hearsay.
I believe that falls under an appropriate exception. Overruled. Go ahead.
You said you heard Rob. How did you know it was Rob?
Well, the first time I heard Bill, I kind of questioned it because I teach in that area, and I thought, oh boy, a student hollering my name or something. But when the next sound was Bill Shin, and that was kind of alarming, and I jumped up, and
Did you
then...
look out your window? Did you look out your
No,
window?
no.
What did you do?
Then I heard help, and I pulled on a pair of gym shorts and hit the hall and ran down the hall to the front door.
Before you left the bedroom, was your wife up and out of bed?
No, she was beside of me, and as I made my first move out of the bedroom, I said, "It's Rob." And
Did you give her some instructions?
not at that point.
Did you exit your house?
Yes. The last thing I probably said to her was that maybe Brittany or something like that. I thought maybe something was wrong with their youngest daughter.
You are aware of their youngest daughter's condition?
Yes.
And have there been medical emergencies in the past?
There had, but not connected with me or anything like that.
What did you do?
Probably within 10 or 15 seconds, I was leaving the front porch, and as soon as I opened the door, I hollered Rob, and he said, "Bill Sheehan," and I said, "Yeah, Rob," and he said, "Somebody's in my house." And about that time, I stopped, and I just turned around. My wife was in the open door, and I said, "Call the cops." And then I started on down toward the driveway, and I shouted, "Is he still in the house?" And he said, I don't know, I think. And I said, did you see him leave or anything?" And he said, "No." And so I said, the way I'm up over his driveway, and I was looking straight down in his driveway, so he's in the front of the house there pretty much, and at the end of my driveway is the back corner of his house. So all I knew to do was try to surround the house, and so I said, you stay here, and I'll go to the back corner and watch the backyard in case they try to escape. And then I believe Lisa said that he's got it.
Let me stop you there.
Okay.
Where was Lisa?
They both were in the driveway.
Go ahead.
I believe it was Lisa that said, "He's got a knife." And I kind of put my brakes on a second and thought, what am I going to do? And there's nothing available in my driveway. So I said, I don't remember if I did respond. I just slowed down and started proceeding cautiously, and I jumped down over the wall of the driveway about 6 or 7 foot, and I went to the corner and kind of slowed down and just started trying to get my eyes adjusted to the darkness back there.
Let me ask you this. When you first observed Rob, what did you observe about his clothing?
Well, I didn't observe him for quite a while, for a few minutes, several minutes. I had my mind on one thing, is just watching the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to continue?
No, just tell me what you saw about his clothes.
Well, I didn't see anything about his clothes at that time, at this time.
No, I don't mean now, I mean ever. At any time when you saw
I would
Rob.
object to the question, would you ever
That
seen about Rob
evening-
Whedbee's clothes at any time?
Rephrase this.
That, on that evening, when you finally saw Rob Whedbee.
Okay, he was
what did you
wearing,
observe about the condition of his clothes?
he had blood all over a white T-shirt and his white underwear.
And did you observe any injuries?
Yes, he had a cut in his hand, and that seemed to, he had to kind of was holding his hand closed like that. His hand was cut. And later in the evening, he asked me to see if he was cut up here. He knows that he was bleeding somewhere, but he really couldn't tell, you know, what it was. And I looked, and he had about a half-inch incision on one of his ears right here.
Did you or Rob Whedbee ever see Michael Frazier around that house that evening?
He or Rob Whedbee ever saw Michael Frazier?
At any time when you were together with Rob Whedbee, did you see Michael Frazier that evening?
No, I never saw him.
At any time when you were not with Rob Whedbee, did you see Michael Frazier that
I
evening?
did not.
Did you observe the back of the house?
I did.
For approximately how long?
30 to 60 seconds, probably, from that point, from the corner.
Did you find out who you were looking for?
Later on, as I finally talked to
How'd you
Rob.
find it out?
Your Honor, at this point, I object to hearsay. Obviously, it wouldn't be an excited utterance if he found out sometime later.
We were beyond that point, so.
When did you find it out? Let me ask you that. In this continuum, when did you find out who you were looking for?
When I ended up down on the street, Wickham Road, beside of Rob's lower end of his house, he was at a distance from me when we came together, and I wanted to check if he was okay physically. This was before I noticed how bad he was injured. He said, "I know who it was."
Was he still excited? Upset?
Your Honor,
I'm gonna let her ask the question.
Was he still excited and upset?
Yes.
Your Honor, it comes still part of the excited
All right,
utterance.
go ahead.
Who did he say it was?
He said it was Rob Whedbee.
It was who?
I'm sorry. He said it was Michael Frazier.
You've just heard the testimony of William Shin, the next-door neighbor of Lisa and Rob Whedbee in Knoxville, Tennessee. Court TV viewers are accustomed to seeing direct examination followed by cross. In this case, with this witness, there was no cross-examination, in part because in this case, many of the facts are agreed on by both the parties. To help us understand and talk intelligently about this case, we have with us this morning Ruth Jones, who is a good friend, a veteran Court TV commentator, and an expert in a number of areas that I think are germane to this case involving battered women. Good morning, Ruth.
Good morning.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
One of the things that the defendant, Frazier, says in this case is that he was concerned and motivated by Lisa Whedbee's tales of her being battered and abused. Before we get into what Mr. Frazier believed, let me ask you something about the battered wife or the battered woman syndrome. That's something that you've become pretty familiar with in your work, isn't it?
Yes, in fact, it's a theory that has been put forward since the 70s, actually, a psychological theory as to why women stay in abusive relationship. It also explains the cycle of abuse that may occur in an abusive relationship, that it starts with some minor, maybe emotional, psychological abuse, it builds to an abusive incident of physical abuse, and then there's what's called the honeymoon stage, in which the batterer would say to the woman he would agree to get help, he would promise never to do this again, and then there's a cycle that occurs once and then occurs again. So that's the cycle of abuse that keeps a woman involved in a relationship. That has been introduced in courts for women who have been charged with killing their alleged batterers, to explain why they viewed the world in the way that they did, and to be a background for self-defense claim.
Is it sometimes used to answer the question that we've all heard sometime, if she was really being beaten, why would she stay?
Exactly, because in fact it is counterintuitive. We think there's this perception that if a woman is really being abused and it's really that bad, she will of course leave. And that's why defendants who are allowed to bring in expert witnesses who explain that sometimes while it appears the woman may not be trying to leave, she is in fact making small actions to leave, and in fact what brings her back is not the violence, but the abuser's promises to change his behavior, to do better, to get help, and sometimes also to try to maintain the family, particularly when there are children involved.
Now in this case, both the defendant Frazier and his lover, Lisa Whedbee, were indicted, but she's going to get a separate trial. In fact, she's now in North Carolina awaiting trial. But what the defendant Frazier is saying is that Lisa told him about her abuse, and that was one of the reasons he went to the house and was at least initially willing to participate in a plot to kill her husband. Have you ever heard of the battered woman syndrome being used in that way in connection with a person who was responding to another person's battering?
No, I think this is another use that's developing of the battered woman syndrome, but what I have been observing is that since the battered woman syndrome has been used since the 70s, we are seeing an expanded use. For example, in the Simpson case, at one point, the defense team said that they were going to call Dr. Lenore Walker, who is noted with, in fact, first talking about the battered woman syndrome, to present evidence for the defense, saying that he did not fit the pattern of a batterer. So, and that is becoming more common, that defendants who are charged with killing their wives have been trying to use the battered woman syndromes to exclude themselves from a guilty conviction. This is a somewhat more interesting argument because the defendant in this case is arguing, I committed whatever acts I did to try to defend her, based on her perception of the harm, the danger that she was in.
Well, one of the things that we assume that a court and a jury would consider when assessing whether a woman had been battered would be whether or not when the police arrive at the scene they observe any evidence of that. And what next we're going to hear is the testimony of Officer Weller, who was the first police officer to arrive at the scene of the Whedbee home in Knoxville, Tennessee.
As you approached that location, what did you anticipate finding?
Got a call of a possible break-in, possible assault.
Were you aware of who resided at that location before you arrived there?
No, I did not.
Okay. When you got at or close to the scene, did you encounter someone?
Yes, I did.
And who was that?
Mr. Whedbee.
Okay. And when you encountered him, where was he?
He was out in the street.
How was he dressed?
I believe he had on a t-shirt and shorts.
What did you observe about his condition?
He had blood on his face, on the front of his shirt, and on his hands. He was very nervous.
Was he excited?
Yes, he was.
Upset?
Yes.
Did you, at that point, recognize Mr. Whedbee?
No, I did not.
Did you ask him what had happened?
Yes, I did.
What did he tell you?
He said that he was in bed asleep, and someone came in and attacked him, and he thought he knew who it was.
Who did he tell you it was?
Michael Frazier.
Before that time, or at approximately that time, had you had occasion to attend Trinity United Methodist Church?
Yes, I did.
And did you know Michael Frazier?
I just knew him as being the organist. I did not know him personally.
When Mr. Whedbee told you the name Michael Frazier, did that mean anything to you at that point?
No, it did not.
When did it come to mean something to you?
He showed me a church directory which had all the members' photographs in it. When he showed me the picture of who he thought it was, yeah, I recognized the photo as being Michael Frazier.
Now, did you go into the Whedbee home?
Yes, I did.
What was your purpose in doing that?
He wasn't, Mr. Whedbee wasn't sure if his wife was still in the house, and he wanted us to check and make sure the kids and everybody were all right.
When you went into the house, what person or persons did you find in there?
I found a little girl, his little girl in there.
Brittany?
The one that has Down syndrome, I believe it was.
Okay.
She was in the crib asleep.
Right. Did you at any time that evening see Mr. Frazier?
No, I did not.
These events occurred in Knox County, Tennessee?
Yes, it did.
Good morning, Officer Weller.
Good morning.
Rob Whedbee told you he thought it was Michael Frazier.
Yes.
At this point, there was some doubt in his mind concerning who this person was in his house?
Objective
Correct.
characterization of doubt in his mind.
Well, Your Honor, this
Let's
also...
cross-examine. Go ahead.
He just told me that I can't advise what he was thinking. He just said that he thought it was Michael Frazier.
So at that point, there was not a positive identification of the assailant, correct?
No.
Nothing further.
One of the intriguing aspects about this case is how all the participants came to know each other. Michael Frazier, the defendant on trial here, came to know Lisa Whedbee, his future lover, and her husband while doing a story about the Whedbees and the challenge of raising a child that had Down syndrome. In addition to doing the story for which he won an award, it turns out that all of them went to the same church, where Michael was an organist and Lisa was a member of the choir, and Officer Weller, whose testimony you just heard, also attended the same church. Those relationships are interesting and ultimately come to bear on the question of why Michael felt the way he did about Lisa Whedbee. Speaking of Lisa Whedbee, Ruth, she's in North Carolina on bail. Is that an unusual situation for a person to be indicted in the state of Tennessee but awaiting trial in North Carolina?
Yes, that's fairly unusual, especially given the seriousness of the charge here. We're talking about attempted murder. You have the concern, one, that she's going to fail to return to the state. So sometimes if a defendant is let out on bail, one of the conditions of bail is not to leave the state. The other element that I would think would be a particular concern if there is the allegation that she tried to kill her then husband. And then there's the concern, well, what would she be doing in the interim? Would she potentially be planning some other way to harm him if indeed she was involved the first time? So I think it's fairly unusual, and I think that's one of the reasons the victim in this case sought a temporary restraining order, and that would exclude her from contact with him, from going to their previous homes, because he probably was concerned about the potential for future harm also.
I agree. That's very interesting, and I think we'll have a chance to talk more about the restraining order and some of the after effects of this trial and of the events that gave rise to it. In the meantime, you probably think that you've heard an awful lot about DNA in some other case in California. We're going to actually, when we come back, hear some testimony about DNA in this case, but I think you'll see the defense handle it a little bit differently. See you soon. Hi, I'm Raymond Brown, and we're about to watch the testimony of Special Agent Joe Miner under questioning by District Attorney Joe Helms about the subject of DNA.
Would you state your name, please, sir?
Joe Miner.
Mr. Miner, where are you employed?
I'm employed by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Forensic Services Division in Nashville, Tennessee, as a special agent forensic scientist. I'm assigned to the DNA analysis unit.
And what was your previous assignment, sir?
Previously, I was with the forensic serology section of the laboratory, where I examined physical evidence for the presence of blood and other body fluids and testified to my results in courts throughout Tennessee.
What are your current responsibilities in the DNA analysis unit?
Currently, upon request, I perform DNA analysis on physical evidence, develop DNA profiles to determine if those profiles could match a known blood sample or not match the sample.
What is your educational background and training, Special Agent Miner?
I graduated from Austin Peay State University with a Bachelor of Science degree and a double major in biology and chemistry. Have a Master's of Science degree as well from Austin Peay in biology. In addition to the training that I received by the TBI, I've attended schools at the FBI Academy, some of which I received coursework credit from the University of Virginia. Those schools included forensic serology, blood stain analysis methods, DNA typing methods, laboratory applications of DNA typing methods, advanced aspects of DNA typing methods, and I've been invited or have attended an international symposium on DNA analysis methods.
Are you a member of any professional organizations, sir?
Yes, I'm a member of the Southern Association of Forensic Scientists and the Tennessee Division of the International Association of Identification. And I'm also a member of the adjunct faculty of Cumberland University, where I teach a course in forensic science.
Does the Tennessee Bureau of Identification DNA Laboratory follow a quality assurance program to ensure high standards for DNA analysis?
Yes, there was a national group called the Technical Working Group on DNA Analysis Methods set up in 1989, set up guidelines and controls for quality assurance, and we've incorporated that program in our quality assurance program at the TBI.
And how many DNA cases has the TBI DNA lab examined?
We've examined probably close to 200 cases in the past 2 years since we started casework, and that would be probably about 800 exhibits or samples that produced somewhere around 2,000 DNA profiles.
Have you testified before, sir, concerning DNA analysis?
Yes, I have.
And in what courts?
In Clarksville and Oak Ridge, Franklin, here, a total of 6 times counting today.
Your Honor, we would submit Mr. Special Agent Minor as an expert in his field.
Qualifications, and I think they can.
We have no objection.
Very good.
Special Agent Minor, what is DNA briefly?
DNA is an abbreviation for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's simply a molecule that's found in your chromosomes, that's found in your cells. It basically is the genetic material that you've inherited from your mother and your father, and it determines your genetic blueprint. In other words, what makes you a unique individual. And except for identical twins, no two people would have the same DNA.
And what is meant briefly by forensic DNA test profiling?
DNA profiling refers to a technique called RFLP, and that's only important in that of the 2 types of DNA analysis, it's the most discriminating type. DNA profiling takes advantage of a technology that looks at sites along the DNA on 4 pairs of chromosomes. And those sites have been found to be extremely variable between individuals. So if you examine enough of those sites and make a match back to a known standard, then you can derive from that there's a strong degree of association between an evidence DNA profile and a suspect or victim's DNA profile.
And how is a forensic DNA comparison made?
Typically, in a forensic DNA case, I receive about 3 or 4 items, usually 1 or 2 evidence items, and then blood standards from the known victim and suspect. The DNA is isolated from the evidence sample along with the victim and suspect's DNA. In other words, it's pulled out of that sample. The DNA is treated with a chemical that cuts it into various size pieces, and those pieces are separated by an electrical current. Once the DNA is spread out, it's transferred to a nylon sheet that's bathed in a series of DNA probes. You can't see DNA, but the DNA probes locate those various size fragments that we're interested in looking at. And if you put a piece of X-ray film against that nylon sheet, then over a period of time, the DNA probes, which are radioactively labeled, will expose the X-ray film and produce a pattern of bands. And in the case on this genetic snapshot, so to speak, there would be a pattern of bands for the evidence samples, a pattern of bands for the victim and the suspect, along with appropriate controls that we run. So if you do a side-by-side comparison by looking at this piece of film, you can determine whether the evidence pattern matches either the victim or suspect or does not match.
And Special Agent Minor, how is the statistical significance of a DNA match determined?
DNA profiling laboratories, just like ourselves at the TBI, sample populations, sample a portion of the population and develop DNA profiles. We sampled about 900 samples and produced over 3,000 profiles. Once these DNA profiles are determined to see how common or rare they are in the population, you can take the DNA profile from a piece of evidence and determine how likely it is that it would appear in the general population.
another population database, such as the FBI's, provide similar results to your database?
Yes, recent studies and publications show that databases from around the world and the United States are very similar in their frequency distribution of DNA profiles.
Mark, this is the next exhibit. Yeah, it probably should be collective. There's more than one item inside it.
What's that number, man?
27.
27?
I'll show you this envelope, Special Agent Minor, and ask you if you recognize it and its contents.
Yes, I do. The envelope's marked with my identifying marks, case number and exhibit number and initials on the outside.
And what is inside?
There are 4 items inside. First item that I have here is a blood swatch from Robert Whedbee. This would be a known standard of a blood sample, and they're prepared by drying them on a cotton cloth.
Hold that so the judge can see it.
I see it. Go ahead.
I also have a sample identified from Michael Frazier with blood stains on it prepared from a blood tube that I use for a standard of comparison. In the Ziploc bag that I'm holding, I have a cutting from the subject's pants with apparent blood stainings, and in the other Ziploc bag there is a cutting from subject's black t-shirt. And all these have my identifying marks and are sealed with evidence tape.
Special Agent Minor, did you make these DNA tests that you have explained to the jury?
Yes, I did.
On these items before you?
Yes.
And what conclusions were you able to make from the test results you received?
The evidence profiles that were produced, first of all, did not match the suspect's blood. So the blood that's on the t-shirt or the pants is not the suspect's blood. However,
Who is the suspect?
The suspect being Michael Frazier.
So that's not his blood?
Right, it's not his blood on the shirt or the pants. However, the DNA profile did match the victim, Robert Whedbee's DNA profile.
On both the shirt and the pants?
That's correct.
Did you make a statistical determination regarding what fraction of the general population could have contributed the DNA profile obtained from the evidence before you?
Yes, the probability that someone else other than the victim could have left the blood stain on the shirt and pants in the Caucasian population, for example, is 1 in 169 million. And for the black population, it's approximately 1 in 1.24 billion.
At this point, in the fall of 1995, most of us know more about deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, than we ever expected to. In this case, however, the defense attack or cross-examination of the DNA expert was very limited and consisted of eliciting from him the fact that he didn't know how the alleged victim's blood got on the defendant's clothes. There was no challenge to whether or not it was, in fact, the blood of the alleged victim on the defendant's clothes. Not only was the DNA testimony pretty short, but in fact this entire state's case consisted of only 4 witnesses. After Agent Joe Minor, the state rests. After we come back from this break, we're going to hear more about the interesting and two-pronged defense in Tennessee versus Frazier. Hi, I'm Raymond Brown. Court TV this morning is bringing you Tennessee versus Frazier, the so-called love triangle case from Knoxville, Tennessee, in which a young award-winning newspaper reporter is accused of conspiring with his lover to attempt to kill her husband, a man who lived with her in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is a case in which the defendant was found, by everyone's agreement, standing over the alleged victim in his bedroom with a butcher knife in his hand. A case in which it's a challenge to present a defense. And we're going to talk a little bit about that defense with Ruth Jones, our commentator this morning. Before we get to the defense, we noted that the prosecution's case was relatively short, consisting mainly of the testimony of the alleged victim, an expert on DNA, a police officer, and a next-door neighbor, and that the cross-examination by the defense of those witnesses was very brief. Is there a reason why the defense isn't fighting about a lot of the facts relevant to this case?
Well, the defense theory of the case is that they're not contesting most of the major facts. They're not disagreeing that their client was found in the victim's home standing over him. What they are alleging is that they say they have reasons and legal excuses for his behavior. So they're not fighting with the facts of what actually occurred.
Now, there are actually two reasons that the defense is offering. One of them is that this defendant was concerned about Lisa, his lover, because she'd been battered. And we talked a little bit earlier about the battered woman syndrome. The real question, of course, isn't whether she was battered, but whether or not Frazier believed she was battered.
Well, actually, there are two elements. Whether his belief that she was battered and her belief that she was in danger was reasonable, based on all the circumstances that he knew. The other element that I think is going to be very difficult for the defense is whether there was an imminent threat to her physical safety. It's not enough if you're asserting the defense of others or self-defense that you say, well, sometimes I had a vague feeling that I was in danger. The law requires you to really explain more specifically how the person you harm could have harmed Lisa in this case. So I think it may be difficult for the defense to paint a picture that there was some imminent physical threat to Lisa.
All parties in this case agree that Lisa let her lover, Michael Frazier, into the house where she and her husband lived the night of this alleged attempted murder, and hid him in a closet in the basement, and eventually let him out of the basement after seducing her husband, and led him upstairs to the bedroom. Now, this concept that Frazier believed that Lisa was being beaten and abused, that's relevant to how he got into the house and why he was there.
Right.
Is there another part to the defense here, something called renunciation?
Yes. Renunciation is when you have this type of attempt crime, when there's not an actual murder committed, the law allows a provision that if you change your mind and if you do what you can to prevent the actual murder from taking place, that is a defense, that in fact you can be cleared. And the public policy reasons are clear. We want people to change their mind from criminal conduct, so we intend to try to reward them. Again, though, I think the defense is going to have a very difficult job. The jury has the factual question of determining, did the defendant change his mind, or did the victim wake up and defend himself, and that's in fact what changed the defendant's mind.
Can a defendant avail himself of the defense of renunciation if he changes his mind at the last second?
Well, I think from the statute here that you can, the timing is important, but the real question is whether you changed your mind and were able, and your actions prevented the actual murder from taking place. So yes, you can, right to the very last second, change your mind, but you better do more than change your mind, because you're going to get caught. Because a police officer is standing in front of you and watching you really suggests that you didn't change your mind, you just changed your strategy.
Would the nature of the wounds, if any, suffered by the alleged victim have some bearing on the question of whether this was renunciation or whether this was a real struggle?
Right. That seems to be the heart of this case. Whether, in fact, the defendant changed his mind, tried to leave, and by that point the victim engaged him in a struggle which caused the injuries to the victim, or if, in fact, the defendant changed his mind or didn't change his mind and then got involved in the struggle but was losing the fight and then ran away.
We are now going to hear more about these fascinating defenses, renunciation and defense of others, as we hear from the defense psychiatrist, Dr. McCoy.
I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and I earned this from the University of Tennessee in 1977. I started working at Child and Family Services, which is an agency here in Knoxville. I worked there for almost 3 years. I went into private practice, and in my private practice, I see children, I see teenagers, I see adults, I do counseling with these people, I do psychological testing. I have a specialty in what's known as forensic psychology, and that is where psychology interacts with the courts, and that would involve, for example, doing custody cases, doing personal injury cases with people who've been in accidents or have had some sort of trauma. It would involve working in criminal cases.
Have you ever testified as an expert before, doctor?
Yes, I have.
Have you testified for both the state and the defense?
Yes, I was a consultant at Knox County Juvenile Court for 7 years, and I testified numerous times then, probably mostly for the state. Since I left there several years ago, I've testified mostly for the defense in criminal cases, occasionally for the state. Sometimes I've testified for the federal government.
Dr. McCoy, did you have an occasion to examine Mike Frazier?
I did.
Please describe to the jury the scope of your examination and subsequent evaluation.
I met with Michael Frazier beginning June 22nd, 1994. I met with him about 21 times and for a period of time totaling close to 32 hours. I also interviewed people familiar with Michael. I met with his parents twice. I met with the lady who's now his ex-wife, Tracy Doty, twice. I met with Michael Frazier's brother, Terry, and I also reviewed records. I reviewed the indictment of Michael Frazier and Lisa Whedbee. I've reviewed the transcript of the preliminary hearing. I've read newspaper articles. I looked at the police crime report. I've reviewed memos that Dan Derrick, a private investigator, prepared. I've looked at Michael Frazier's resume. I've looked at newspaper articles he's written, other personal writings he's done. I looked at the medical records of Lisa Whedbee, and I've seen pictures of Rod Whedbee following the incident. I've looked at the 911 transcript, and I reviewed the petition for the order of protection and the agreed order of protection as well.
Can you describe to the jury what psychological testing was performed and just basically in everyday language explain to us what it means?
I gave Michael a fairly much a standard test battery, and in psychology that means an IQ test and personality measures to get an idea of what this person's personality function is. And I also gave him some supplemental questionnaires to give me background information on him, health problems, personal problems that he thinks he's experiencing. So the IQ test is known as the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale Revised, and that's one of the probably the most commonly given IQ test. And it gives a measure of verbal IQ, performance IQ, and then you average them together and that gives the full scale IQ. I also gave him 2 personality measures, one of them the MMPI and the other one the Mellon or the MCMI2.
Please tell the jury the results of these tests, beginning with the IQ.
Michael, on the IQ test, is in the average range, and that is averaging together the verbal IQ, where he's actually in the superior range, and the performance IQ, where surprisingly he's in the low average range. So if you average together superior and low average, it came out to average overall.
So basically, what does that tell us, Doctor?
Well, he was very high in his knowledge of common English vocabulary words, and that's not really too surprising since he's a writer. He writes better, I think, than he speaks. He's very high in information he's retained from schooling. He's really kind of an intellectual egghead type person who's good in verbal skills as opposed to the performance part of the IQ test where it's more visual motor coordination. That's where he's low average. He does less well on that.
Dr. McCoy, did you gain any insight into Michael's personality from the personality testing that was performed?
The personality testing suggested a person who's kind of an introverted person. He keeps to himself. He's reserved. He's not someone who socially is very initiatory or very spontaneous. He has pretty poor self-esteem, and he has an image of himself as a kind of a weak and ineffective person. He is someone who would experience life as rather empty and meaningless, and other people are likely to see him as kind of a strange, touchy, almost asocial kind of person. He is a meticulous, orderly kind of person who values being on time and always being prepared. He sees himself as an outsider, someone who's alienated from his family, alienated from other people. He is a guarded person. He's mistrustful. He distances himself from others. He is depressed, or at least at the time the testing was performed, a depressed person who is moody, nervous, contends with feelings of inferiority. He shows the possibility of, the term is called psychotic decompensation, and what that means is psychosis is being unable to distinguish fantasy from reality. So in times of stress, he shows the vulnerability to show psychotic or psychotic-like symptoms.
An egghead type of person. You just heard the defense psychologist refer to the defendant on whose behalf she was called in Tennessee versus Frazier, refer to the defendant as an egghead type of person. How does that relate to the defense of renunciation and defense of others? We'll learn more about that when we return after this commercial break.